Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of the Fat Doctor podcast. I am your host, Dr. Ashalami. I had to think about that for a moment. Weight Inclusive GP and budding author, getting ready to release a book in a few weeks' time, all about how we've been lied to when it comes to weight loss. Just every single thing we've ever been told about weight loss is actually a lie. And I'm going to cover today something that many of you will be familiar with, but perhaps I'll be introducing some little known facts that you'd never come across before. I was studying the Minnesota Starvation Experiment as part of my research for my book, and I want to tell you about what we found and challenging the lie. Someone at some point in time has told you there's no harm in trying to lose weight, right? A lot of people will have said that to you. And they're lying. There's a lot of harm. And we've known about this harm for decades. We're going to talk about today what actually happens when you restrict food, what the science actually says. We're going to talk about the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, the most important study, and that some of you will be familiar with, and a lot of people have never even heard of. So, let's get stuck in. Let's talk about the actual study itself, the who, the what, the whys of it all. I'm going to set the scene. It's 1944. World War II is coming to a close, but we didn't know that at the time. There are people starving across German-occupied Europe. The US has entered the chat somewhat later than they should have, according to some. We'll leave that one there. There's a young man, a young physiology professor named Ansel Keys. You might have heard of him. He actually introduced the world to the body mass index, the BMI, but that came later. Right now it's 1944. He's young. He's fresh-faced, full of enthusiasm. He's a professor at the University of Minnesota. And he has realised, we know sort of almost nothing about what happens to the human body when it's starved. Most importantly, what happens after a person is starved? How do we safely refeed a person who's been starving? And so he decides to call on a group of conscientious objectors, people who had refused to be part of the war effort, be part of go and fight the war, I should say, and already feeling a little bit guilty, right? They've chosen not to serve, and he sends out these. I think they were pamphlets, that basically reads, "Will you starve that they be better fed?" 400 men responded. That's a lot of guilty, conscientious objectors. 36 were selected. And the project ran from November 1944 all the way through, actually, beyond the end of the war. It lasted about a year. And there were 3 phases to it. The first was 3 months long. And during that time, they were observing these men eating normal amounts of food. And normal amounts of food was roughly 3,200 calories. The next 3 months was a period of restriction where they were given half of what they normally ate, 1,800 calories, between 1,600 and 1,800. And then the last... that was 6 months. I said 3 months. That's a lie. 6 months of starvation. And then 3 months of gradual refeeding. Right? So 3 months of just stabilization, 6 months of fasting or restriction, 1,800 calories, and then 3 months of gradual refeeding. And there was different people were given different amounts to begin with, which was quite mean. Some people were given more than others. Cruel. They had meals twice a day that were intentionally monotonous to mimic, wartime shortages. They were required to walk 22 miles a week and also to work, to attend classes. They had to keep personal journals. It was all very kind of, I'd say quite invasive, actually. They all lived together in the South Tower of the University Football Stadium. And they go through extensive testing throughout all of these 3 phases. Now, as I said before, what counted as starvation in 1944 was 1,800 calories. How many of you are actually eating 1,800 calories a day? Those of you who are on a diet, those of you who have ever been on a diet, probably consuming significantly less. We're currently recommending that the average person consumed between 2,000 and 2,500. So what is starvation to them was almost standard for us now, right? If you go into a supermarket in the UK, it will say all over the supermarket, the current calorie recommendation is roughly 2,000 calories a day. So that, 2,000, 1,800, you do the math. There are doctors out there that are prescribing very low energy diets of 800 calories. That is less than half of what the Minnesota volunteers received. 21st century dieting is more extreme than wartime starvation. Get that into your head. 21st century dieting is far more extreme than wartime starvation. And I need you to keep that in mind for everything that follows. Because now I'm going to tell you about what actually happened to these people, to these men, who had never been on a diet before in their lives, right? First and foremost, on average, they lost 25% of their body weight, which is weird because there are people who go on diets now it's been evolving, but nowadays, if you can get between 2.5% and 5% of your body weight, you've done well. But they lost 25% of their body weight. Why? Because it was their first time. And it's really easy to lose a lot of weight over a period of 6 months if it's your first time round. Your body is not primed for famine. But remember, we've talked in the past about epigenetics, we've talked about environmental factors, and we've talked about the biggest thing of all, which is that going on a diet and weight cycling as a result is the biggest risk factor for weight gain. And the more you diet, the more used your body is to managing and holding on to your fat stores, which is why nowadays, if you were to restrict your calories to 1,800, I'm guessing you wouldn't lose 25% of your body weight, even if you did it for 6 months. And I know this because you've done it many, many times, as have I, for longer than 6 months, and didn't get anywhere near as much. But that's what happened. They were visibly emaciated. There was muscle wasting. There was edema. There was swelling. That's how bad it got. This was regardless of their starting weight. And there are pictures. They're quite upsetting pictures, actually. The things that they went through. There's evidence that they had a significant metabolic slowdown. This is not new. We've talked about this time and time again. When you stop eating as much as you used to, the first thing your body does is reduce your metabolic rate. There was anemia, there was dizziness, there was extreme weakness, there was cold intolerance, there was chronic fatigue, there was intestinal disturbances, there was hair loss, there was reduced stamina. That's what happened to people who went on a diet of 1,800 calories. Only 32 of the 36 actually completed the whole year. 2 broke the diet, and it's really sad. 1 stole raw root vegetables and ate them, and 1 ate food from bins. They went through the garbage bins and found food, and that's how they broke the fast. There was 1 urological complication. Somebody who had was so sick they couldn't complete it from something urological. I'm not sure what it was. And there was 1 that was showing inconsistent weight loss, and they didn't believe that this person wasn't sneaking in food, so they excluded them from the study as well. So out of the 36, only 32 completed it. There's this. I read that they chewed up to 40 packs of gum a day, because that's how they were coping, just chewing gum until they banned gum. How was the physical effects? Now on to the psychological effects, because we're just getting started, folks. Psychological effects included mood fluctuations, irritability, decreased motivation, low libido, impaired concentration. Many of them dropped out of their university classes. Most of them were students, but they dropped out. There's a really interesting article where years later, the participants from the study, I think it's 60 years later, the participants of the studies are recalling the events. And one of them said that food became the only central and the only thing really in one's life. It was all about food. Everything revolved around those 2 meals a day. They developed very unusual food rituals that, of course, were brand new to them. So they diluted a lot of their meals with water to make the portions look bigger. They dreamt about food. They read about food. They started talking about food constantly. One participant accumulated nearly 100 cookbooks. These were men in the 1940s. They didn't buy cookbooks. They couldn't stop thinking about food. We call it food noise now. Like it's a bad thing. Oh, we need to get rid of the food noise. The food noise exists because your brain is telling you to eat food. If you're constantly being bombarded with thoughts about food and dreams about food, and you keep talking about food and you keep looking at recipes for food, and all you can think about is food, you're not eating enough food. That is a guaranteed sign that you're not eating enough food. I don't care how much food you're eating, it's not enough. And then there was the exercise piece, right? Because remember, they had to move 22 miles a week, it's about 3 miles a day. They weren't having to do strenuous gym workouts or anything. They just had to walk. And in phase 1, they were fine, of course. Everything was great. And in phase 2, it got so bad that one man described that he would stand outside the library doors and he'd wait for someone to open the door because he was too weak to open it himself. Another talked about crossing the road and said that he would, like, when he was crossing the road, he would wait until there was like a step down on the curb, just so that he didn't have to put his foot up on the curb and lift his body up. That's how exhausted he was. Like, he wouldn't just cross the road. He would wait until he found a step down on the curb and then he would cross. Are you getting this? Right now, you are consuming far fewer calories. Remember, they started off consuming 32,000. That was 3,200. That was the average calorie intake of a man in the 1940s. That was average. Just how much they were eating. They dropped to 1,800. They became emaciated, so weak they couldn't open a fucking door. All they could think about was food. They were so ill, and they were so, like, it was so profound. And it was only 6 months, guys. It was only 6 months. They dropped out of classes. They just basically just lived their lives thinking about food. You're doing more exercise on fewer calories and expected to go to work, continue with all of your chores and, like, all of your responsibilities. These guys couldn't cross a road properly. And you're supposed to, like, do your job and have enough energy to come home and look after your kids or do whatever it is that you do. It's crazy. You have to come home and walk the dog and then go to the gym. And, like, some of you are on 800 calories a day. That is, like, when you think about it like that, what do you think has happened since 1944? Do you think human beings have changed? Or maybe it's because you're fat and you think, oh, well, those were thin men. It's different for them. Why? Why is it different for them? Do you think that having fat stores makes it suddenly miraculously, like, makes you immune to all of these things? It doesn't. Fat is a long-term energy store. It is not a short-term energy store. And yeah, it's great because you have excess energy and you have extra stores, which means you can probably go for longer. But it doesn't mean you don't have any of these symptoms. You'll have all of these symptoms to a greater or lesser degree. Folks, most of these men lost all interest in dating and sex, described being profoundly miserable, and 60 years later they can still remember how profoundly miserable they were. They were desperate for phase 2 to end. But this is the part that nobody talks about. Phase 3, which is the refeeding part, for many of them, that was actually the worst part. They said this was actually the hardest phase because there was light at the end of the tunnel. They were like, I just got to get through this. I just got to get through this. I just got to get through this. And they expected to. Why? Because the symptoms persist long after the experiment ended, or in this case, the diet ended. If you go on a diet and then you stop the diet, you're not going to feel better the next day. It takes a long time because it takes a long time for your body to recover. None of them reported feeling back to normal at the ends of the 3-month rehab. None of them. They were given, to begin with, a modest calorie increase. And by modest, I mean somewhere between 400 and 1,600 calories. That's like the refeeding phase. But all of them said that wasn't enough. There was nowhere near enough. Obviously, the people who were getting 400 were extremely miserable. But even the ones that were getting 1,600 said, it's not enough. I need more. I need more. I need more because I have to build up. So once upon a time, I could make do on 3,200, but not anymore. I need more now. Binging became commonplace. Some of them made themselves profoundly sick from binging. Some of them did like some really horrible like stuff, they going through again garbage bins and binging on food that they really had no business eating. Some of them ended up in hospital because of binging. The maintenance phase of a diet, you're told, well, you've got to reduce your calories, and then after you reduce your calories, you've got to stick to like a quote unquote normal amount, but the whole point was the moment these folks stopped being starved and were given food again, The number of calories they used to consume simply wasn't enough. They were desperate for more because they were desperate to restore their energy supplies. And that's what the body does. The body doesn't just go, oh, good, there's food now, we can relax. The body goes, fuck, I don't know if this is going to happen again. Quick, eat as much as you possibly can because you never know when there won't be any food. Your body has learned, don't trust the food supply. You don't know if it's going to be there next week. And so binging becomes commonplace. In this article that I was telling you about, that was written sometime later, it's not a newspaper article, it's a journal article. A lot of them reported that it took up to 2 years to feel like themselves again. One participant, as I said, was hospitalised and had to have his stomach pumped after overdoing it for eating, binging. Another vomited on a bus. Just couldn't satisfy their cravings. So just ate and then got on the bus and then threw up everywhere. And disordered eating became really commonplace. So even after it ended, even like a year later, there was still the food noise, the binging, there was self-harm. I think one person cut off their fingers. We know now that dieting leads to disordered eating, and disordered eating can lead to eating disorders. But we knew that then. Like, we've always known that. So why do doctors recommend weight loss when they're seeing this happen? When they were seeing this happen for almost a century? Healthy men who volunteered to starve themselves for science, they were praised. Good for them, these conscientious objectors. When we see thin, predominantly white women starving themselves because of an eating disorder, generally we pity them. I'm not sure that's an appropriate emotion, but we do. We pity them. We feel sorry for them. They've got an eating disorder. That's really sad. But when you see fat people who are starving on doctors' orders, we call that medical care. We applaud it. We don't see anything wrong with it. That's not medical care. That is medical malpractice as far as I'm concerned. If I'm prescribing a treatment to my patients that has never been demonstrated to benefit them in any way, but causes all of these side effects, I'd argue that that's intentionally causing patients harm. That's like, you have a duty to do no harm. That's wrong. When you develop side effects from going on a diet, you are told that you have to endure it without complaint. Get on with your life. Stop moaning, stop being weak. And you do, by the way. You're great at it. You do it over and over again. You don't complain. You're not allowed to complain. If you do complain, and or when you give up, because of course inevitably you will give up, nobody can live like this forever, then you're termed non-compliant. You're a failure. You're weak-willed. You don't have the stamina. You don't have the the mental fortitude. Like you're just judged, and your doctors call you non-compliant. When you regain weight, so when the weight loss slows down and then you hit your peak and then it goes the other way, which is just part of adaptive thermogenesis. It's a well-known fact. It happens to everybody. The doctors say you gave up. They don't say, oh well, this is just part of life. And we know about this, right? Remember, there was a study there was a conference in 1992 where they all agreed, yep, weight loss is par for the course, weight regain is par for the course. But still, your doctor will say you gave up. It's your fault. When your health deteriorates as a result of weight cycling, instead of saying, oh, it's the weight cycling, they go, oh, it's because you're fat in the first place. Being fat was never the problem. Attempting to cure fatness is the problem. Denying people their basic human rights because they're fat, that's the problem. If I found evidence, right, theoretically speaking, if I found evidence that having friends was associated with certain cancers, let's just say I did some observational study and I found evidence that having friends was associated with certain cancers, should I be prescribing isolation as a doctor? Should I be telling my patients you should eat alone, you should avoid social gatherings, you should cut off the people you love indefinitely on the off chance that it might help them not to have cancer? No, right? Like, of course not. That would be absurd. Isolation in of itself is problematic. Isolation causes health complications. Isolation is also cruel. It's cruel to do that. So even if I could find a study that showed that isolation was definitely a risk factor for cancer, I still shouldn't be prescribing it because I have to benefit the pros and I have to weigh up the benefits and the risks, right? I have to pros and cons. And even if I was going to prescribe it, which I shouldn't, but even if I was, I'd have to say to people, look, if you do this, if you really cut off your family, you're going to be really fucking miserable. It's going to affect your mental health. It also puts you at risk of all sorts of issues, but it might reduce your cancer risk. So you decide. But we don't do any of that. Let's think about something logically, right? Human touch is one of the most effective ways to spread infection, right? Like, touching other people or coming into close contact with people is one of the most effective ways to spread infection. If you want to prevent yourself from contracting an infection, you isolate yourself. You don't, but we don't tell patients to live without physical contact. We don't tell patients, don't hug your loved ones, don't have sex, don't comfort, your children. We don't do any of that. Of course we don't. Because, there's a risk that you might contract an infection, but there are lots of positive sides to human touch. It's really important. Human touch. People who don't get touched, I don't mean that in a sexual way, although probably also. But if you don't get touched, you can become really touch starved, right? Like, it can be a real problem. Sunlight genuinely has been linked to cancer. There's no question about this, right? But we don't tell patients to live in darkness. We don't say we want you to live your lives as pale and vitamin D deficient people who never feel the sun on their skin again. What do we say? We say, hey, dude, be sensible, wear a hat, wear sunscreen. Don't take unnecessary risks. But we don't just go, suffer so that you can prevent the risk of melanoma. So why, when it comes to food, something that is just as fundamental as human touch, as sunlight, as connections, why do we think it's okay to tell people that they're not allowed to eat it anymore? Why is it okay to deny something as important and fundamental as food? Eating is bound up in not just fuel, but it's not just fuel for your body. It's also joyful. It's about connection. It's about comfort. How can we tell people to give up these fundamentally important things? To spend their lives hungry, obsessed, exhausted and joyless. These men couldn't cut it for more than 6 months. And we're saying that you have to do it for the rest of your life? To surrender one of the most basic human pleasures indefinitely? So that theoretically you might be able to reduce your risk, even though we've never been able to prove that that's true. But more importantly, we force you to do it now as the price of medical care. And that's where it's really a problem. Because if you have a choice, if you could really say yes or no, then that's fine. People could shout at you to lose weight and it might piss you off and you might just be like, I hate this, and you might, want to shut your ears and just run away. But at least you have a choice. But you don't have a choice anymore. It's the price of medical care. It's the price of a lot of things, actually. It's literally the fucking price of admission into this world, isn't it? Lose weight, otherwise you will be excluded. You will not have access to medical care. You will be forced to suffer. Now you have to make a choice. Suffer in pain or suffer from, from dieting. It's very different, isn't it? It's very different. It's completely and utterly fucking unethical. It is wrong on a fundamentally human level. And there were 36 men who, 80 years ago, proved that to us. And the same dick who started this whole fucking experiment is the same man who is responsible for BMI limits on human beings today. If it weren't for Ansel Keys, there would be no BMI. And if there was no BMI, you and I would be able to get surgery for the things that we need surgery for without having to go on a fucking diet. So I want you to remember that. I want you to be really angry today. I want you to walk away from this podcast episode really, really angry that you're being forced to do something that nobody has any business forcing you to do. Food is a fundamental right, like oxygen, safety, and food. These are your basic human rights. Don't you dare let anyone tell you that you should have to suffer just because of the size of your body. Fuck them. God, I'm angry. This is not medicine. This is punishment. This is punishment dressed up as medicine. It is disgusting and it has to stop. If you are a healthcare professional and you're listening to this today, you need to ask yourself, what gives you the right to tell people to do this? to force themselves to endure this kind of thing and to do so without complaint. You think just because they don't get upset about it, that somehow they're not suffering? Do you think just because that fat person is able to continue on with their job, is able to continue raising their children, is able to continue doing all the things that they're doing, do you think that somehow that means that it's just no big deal? Because it's not. There is plenty of evidence that starvation from the Minnesota Semi-Starvation Experiment is exactly the same and produces the exact same effects, both physical and psychological, as people with eating disorders, as people who are on a diet. That there is very little difference between the three. So next time you tell somebody to eat less and exercise more, to reduce their calories, or if you have the audacity to recommend 800 calories to your patients, I want you to remember that you are actively harming them. You are punishing them in a cruel and inhumane way, and you should be held to account. If no one else is holding you to account, you should hold yourself to account. You should be doing better. You know better. That is not what you have been trained to do. So cut it out. Yeah. Chapter 5 of my book. I think I was trying to remember which chapter it is. Doctors are making you sick. That's chapter 4, sorry. The treatment, chapter 5, the treatment causes the disease. This is the thing. This is what's making people sick. If you want to know more about this and lots of other stuff, then please buy my book when it comes out. Available to pre-order on the 22nd of April. I've said it twice now, so my God, it better be true. Watch the space in case I have to delay it. But yeah, available to pre-order soon. And if you don't want to wait that long, or if you want to be part of the process, and if you want to talk to me and hang out with me and ask me questions, etc., then you can join the waiting room for just £15 a month. And every week, every Monday, we have book club where I read a chapter of my book to you. You get the dulcet tones of Ash Alami reading his own book to you. Has the audacity to call it a book club, even though it's only his own book. You know what? I'm not even going to apologise for that. See you next week, folks. Again, what am I doing next week? I don't know. It's a surprise. And that will keep me coming back, right? I'm going to end on a cliffhanger. See you next week. Have a good one in the meantime.